Welcome back to my channel. It's been 2 months since I've been able to upload anything to you, so I do apologize for that. However, Sinister Grave is back, and I have these 3 scary stories for you. So without further ado, since you've been waiting quite some time, sit back and relax and let these nightmares unfold. I want to tell you a story about a girl and a doll. I know what you're thinking. You've heard this story before. A little girl wants a doll, someone buys it for her, and then the doll goes completely mental and kills everyone. Well, you're wrong. This is a different kind of story. And it happened back in 2009 when I was 16 years old. One day, as I was walking home from school, I noticed a new family had moved into the house at the end of the street. They were a young married couple and they had a little daughter who looked like she was around 6 years old. She wore a white dress with white socks and black shoes. Her hair was long and black, and she was holding a doll in her arms. The doll had a white dress and long black hair as well. In fact, it looked almost exactly like a miniature version of the girl. Every day on my way home from school, I saw the little girl. She was always sitting outside of her house, cradling the doll in her arms, and watched me as I passed by. There was something about the way she stared at me, the cold, dark look in her eyes that always unnerved me. At night, I couldn't sleep. I was plagued by very strange dreams and usually woke up in cold sweats. I could only vaguely remember the dreams, but they all involved the girl and that doll. This went on night after night, and the lack of sleep left me exhausted. And to make things more interesting, there was this old lady who lived next door, and she was very inquisitive. She was one of these old women who knows everything about everyone. She was always eavesdropping and sticking her nose into other people's business. And one day, as I was walking home from school, she grabbed me by the arm. And in hushed tones, she said that she had something to tell me. She wanted to talk about the family who moved into the house at the end of the street. "You don't want to mess with them," she said. "They're not good people. I've heard that they're always on the move and never stay anywhere for long. And that daughter of theirs, did you know that she was adopted? She's not right in the head. And I've heard rumors that she's the offspring of the devil. And that doll that she carries around is in fact not a doll, but a demon made in her image." I just rolled my eyes and walked away, dismissing it as idle gossip from an old crazy woman. But oh, how silly I was. How I wish I had listened to the warnings of that crazy old woman. A few days later, there was a knock on our front door. And when I answered it, a young woman was standing there. She was the mother of the little girl with the doll. "Hello," she said. "I'm your neighbor and I would like to ask you a favor." "Sure," I replied. "What is it?" "Something unexpectedly came up. she said. I have to go on an errand and my husband doesn't get home from work until later. I'll only be gone for a few hours, but I need someone to look after my daughter while I'm away. I know it's a short notice, but would you take care of her? Of course, I said. What is your daughter's name? Lisa, the mother replied. We need to leave now, so if you don't mind. I followed the woman to her house, and I waited while she rushed upstairs. When she returned, she was leading the little girl by the hand. As soon as I saw her, I was taken back. There was something wrong with her. Her eyes were completely black, like the eyes of a shark, and she was clutching that wretched doll in her hands. I don't know what it was about the doll that creeped me out so much. Perhaps it was because it looked so much like the girl, and that it was disturbingly uncanny. And before I had a chance to back out, the mother said her goodbyes and then got into her car and drove away. Without a word, little Lisa reached up and took me by the hand. Her skin was ice cold to the touch, and it sent shivers down my spine. Play with me, she said. We went upstairs to her bedroom, but as soon as I closed the door, I began to feel uneasy. I could detect a strange and unpleasant smell in the room, but I couldn't figure out what it was or where it was coming from. I played with Lisa for about 30 minutes, but then I began to feel a tightness in my chest. I broke out into a cold sweat, and my stomach was churning. I felt like I was going to vomit. I have to go, I gasped. All of a sudden, Lisa scrambled to her feet and cried out, "No, you are going to stay with me forever, and we'll play all the time." She stared at me with those cold black eyes, and I felt like I was going to faint. I was frightened and wanted to get out of the room, but when I tried to open the door, the handle would not turn. I began rattling it, pulling on it, but it was no use. I ran to the window and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. No matter what I tried, I could not open it. And then I remembered the warning of the old woman and cursed myself for not listening to her. I was trembling with fear, but I decided to recite a prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. As soon as I uttered those words, the little girl let out an ear-splitting screech. She screamed so loud that I thought I would go deaf, and I had to clasp my hands over my ears. But I never stopped reciting that prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The girl dropped the doll, and it fell to the floor. All of a sudden, it came to life and came at me, gnashing its teeth and scratching with its clawed hands like a feral animal. I tried to kick it away, but it jumped at my neck and tried to tear my throat out. I fell backwards onto the bed, desperately trying to fight off the doll. It was a terrible struggle. The doll was thrashing back and forth, scraping me and tearing at my clothes. Every time it got its hands around my neck, it started to throttle me, Eventually, I got the upper hand. I grabbed it by the legs and swung it with all my might, smashing its head against the wall. It hit the wall so hard that it left a dent in the plaster. A crack split the doll's face in two, and thick black smoke began pouring out. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. The doll laid on the floor, shaking and wriggling, flopping back and forth like a dying fish. The doll's head split wider, and the smoke bellowing out grew thicker and thicker. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. When I finished reciting the prayer, Lisa was lying in the middle of the room unconscious, and the doll was little more than a steaming pile of molten plastic, hissing and bubbling on the carpet. Just then, Lisa's mother came home. She ran upstairs and burst into the room, demanding to know what had transpired. I tried to explain, but I couldn't get the words out, and I threw up all over their floor. When Lisa regained consciousness, she said that she remembered nothing at all. I looked at her eyes. The blackness was gone, and now they were a bright, vibrant shade of blue. 3 years later, when she was 9 years old, Lisa died suddenly. She drank an entire bottle of bleach, and it corroded her insides. She died in tremendous pain, screaming and crying in agony as her organs slowly broke down and dissolved. The doctors ruled it as an accident, but everyone suspected she had taken her own life. Her parents were devastated. Nobody could ever explain why a girl so young would do such a thing. And a week after the funeral, her mother and father moved out of the house. It held too many bad memories. And as they were going through Lisa's bedroom and packing up her belongings, they found something glued to the back of her mirror. It was a photo of Lisa and the doll. On the other side, written in a childish scrawl, was a message. She has returned to us. For those who answer our call will be damned forever. I'm a single mother. My husband left me a few years ago for another woman. Ever since then, I've been raising our 2 sons alone. Eric is 8 years old and Andrew is just 6. The other day, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. I saw Andrew in the backyard. He was playing football with someone, but I couldn't see who it was. All I could see was Andrew kicking the ball, and someone else was kicking it back to him. I assumed that this was his brother, Eric. I was startled when I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and Eric came in and sat down at the table. I wondered who Andrew was playing with. My children are not allowed to invite anyone into the house without my permission. so I called Andrew to come in for dinner. Annoyed, I asked him, "What were you doing?" "I was playing with my friend," he replied. "What friend?" I asked. "You know, you're not allowed to invite anyone over without my permission." "No, Mom, my friend was from the tree," he said. "He likes to fly." Irritated, I told him to stop making things up. Andrew insisted it was true. He said that his friend didn't want to come inside the house because he might scare me. I realized he must have an imaginary friend, so I started asking questions. "What is your friend's name?" I asked. "Balthazar, Mom." "And where does he live?" "I don't know," he replied, "but he always comes out to play." "And what kind of games do you play?" "All sorts of games. He always comes down from the tree and he asks me if I want to fly like him." At that moment, I felt a shiver run down my body. I heard the sound of laughter coming from the backyard. I got up to see who it was, but when I peered out the window, I couldn't see anyone. "It's him, Mom," said Andrew. "He's waiting for me to come out and play." For some reason, this unnerved me. I suppose I wanted to prove to myself that this Balthazar wasn't real. So I told Andrew to invite him in to have dinner with us. Without saying anything, Andrew got up and walked over to the door. He beckoned with his hand, then came in and sat down at the table. I looked at the doorway, half expecting to see someone come in, but there was no one. "Stop staring at the door, Mom," Andrew said. "He's already here." I told Andrew to stop playing around and started to scold him. Eric began to chuckle. Then the chuckling got louder and turned into crackling laughter. It sent a chill down my spine. I scolded Eric, but he wouldn't stop. His crackling just grew louder and louder. It sounded evil and malicious. "I told you not to play with Eric," said Andrew. Eric could not stop laughing, and Andrew just sat there, calmly eating his dinner. I shouted at Eric and told him to stop playing around. Then all of a sudden, he stopped laughing and grabbed my hand. Then in a deep, rasping voice, he said, "Do you want to fly?" Then he burst into a ghoulish laughter again. I was so disturbed by his behavior, I left the room and went upstairs to calm down. I don't know why, but his laughter sent chills down my spine. It was unsettling. I could still hear it coming from the kitchen. After a while, everything was silent. When I went downstairs again, the boys were back to normal, playing video games on the TV. The next day, I left work early. By the time the children returned home from school, I was already preparing dinner. Everything seemed normal. I told the boys to wash their hands, and they sat down at the table. I served their meals. Everything seemed normal. until I asked my sons what had happened that day. Eric's face was blank. He didn't seem to remember anything about it. Balthazar was eating with us, Andrew said casually. But Balthazar never came to sit at the table, I said. He did, Mom, Andrew insisted. Are you sure? I asked. Why didn't I see him? Mom, you told me to invite Balthazar to dinner, and I did what you said. What do you and Balthazar do together? I asked. When Balthazar comes to play with me, he flies down from the tree, he said. We play games, but sometimes he gets angry because he doesn't like losing. That's when he lets me fly and he just stays on the ground, playing alone. When I heard those words, my skin began to crawl. Then I asked Andrew about what had happened yesterday, when his brother started laughing. Balthazar came into the house yesterday, but he was angry because he didn't like Eric. So he let Eric fly, and he ate with us. And do you remember flying Eric? I asked. No, Mom, Eric replied. I just remember when I was eating and you were sitting at the table, and then I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, you were upstairs in your room. I felt sick to my stomach. I was finally beginning to understand what he was saying. This Balthazar had possessed my son Eric right in front of my eyes. Andrew, who is Balthazar? I demanded. Mom, remember those 2 children who were burned up in the fire? When he said that, the blood ran cold in my veins. Yes, I answered hoarsely. Years ago, in a house not far from where we lived, a whole family was killed. The house had been set on fire and it burned to the ground. All they found afterwards were charred remains. But that all happened a long time ago, before my sons were even born. How could they know about that? Well, the boy is Balthazar, Andrew said. Who told you about that fire? I demanded. Was it one of the other children at school? No, it was Balthazar, Andrew said. Sometimes at night he comes down from the tree and he just stands there very still, watching you while you sleep. I keep telling him you don't like being stared at, but he doesn't listen. My stomach was churning, and I felt like I was going to throw up. What did he tell you about that fire? I managed to croak. He told me one night he heard noises in his house and they woke him up. And when he peeked out the door of his room, he saw his dad lying dead on the ground. And then he heard a scream and saw 2 men cutting his mother's throat. He said he and his sister ran and hid in the closet and they were really scared. After a while, they didn't hear anything outside, but they were still afraid to leave. Then they smelled smoke and they couldn't see, and it started getting really hot. And the last thing he remembered before he fell asleep was that his whole body was on fire. After hearing this, I was speechless. I've never been so scared in my life, and the worst thing is, my children don't know what is happening. Since then, I haven't been able to sleep a wink. I don't know what to do. I need help. My children are being possessed. And how can I sleep knowing that a dead child is watching intently at my bedside? When I was a child, I spent a lot of my time alone. My parents lived in an old house out in the countryside, and there were no other children at my age to play with. I had a little brother, though, but he was only a baby at the time, so I couldn't play with him, and I was always a little lonely. The old country house where we lived had a lot of small rooms. In the corridor, there was a closet with a sliding door where my father would store his tools. I loved to go in there and play with all the tools. It was fun for me at the time. And one day I found an old mirror at the back of the closet. It was an oval-shaped, bronze-framed mirror. It was very ornate. Even though it was quite old and dusty, the glass was very clear. I could see myself perfectly. One time when I was playing in the closet, I happened to glance at the mirror and saw something that truly shocked me. In the reflection, I saw a strange girl standing behind me. Frightened, I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. When I looked back in the mirror, I was confused. The little girl was still there. I guess because I was a child, I wasn't scared of her. I just thought it was strange that she only appeared in the mirror. The little girl had long, dark hair and was pale, very white skin. Through the mirror, she looked at me and laughed. "Hello," she said with a smile. We started talking to each other. The girl told me her name was Nana. We would talk all the time. My parents must have wondered why I spent so much time in the closet talking to myself, but they never took the mirror away from me. It seemed that Nana-chan was not visible to adults. One day, when I was talking to Nana-chan, I said, "I'm lonely. I wish I had some friends. I wish I had some friends I could play with." "Come over and play with me," Nana-chan replied. "I can go over there?" I asked. "How do I do that?" Nana's face became troubled. Then she lowered her voice. I don't know," she whispered. "I'll ask." I wondered who she was going to ask, but all I could hear was silence. Somehow I felt like whoever it was didn't want me to listen. The next day, when I spoke to Nana, she said happily, "I know how you can come over here now. Come on, let's go." I was happy, But I remembered that my parents had always warned me that I'd have to tell them when I went anywhere. Okay, but I'll have to ask my mother, I replied. Nana's face became a little troubled again, and she said, "Don't tell anyone about this. We may not be able to meet each other if you do tell someone." I stayed silent because I did not want to disobey my parents. Then Nana-chan said, "So you'll come play with me tomorrow? Okay? Promise?" "Yeah," I replied. "I promise." Nana-chan reached out and touched the surface of the mirror with her little finger. "Pinky swear?" she asked with a smile. I reached out and pressed the tip of my finger to the mirror beside hers. "Pinky swear." I thought I could feel a slight warmth through the glass. That night, I didn't sleep very much. I didn't tell my parents about Nana-chan, but as I laid there in darkness, questions were swirling around in my head. How could I enter through the mirror? And what kind of place was it over there? And why wouldn't Nana come over here? If I went over there, how would I be able to come back? As I contemplated such things, I grew more and more anxious. I became a little scared of Nana-chan, to be honest. The next day, I didn't go to see Nana. I avoided her. The day after that, and the day after that, I still avoided her. I didn't go near the closet all week. In fact, I never went into the closet again. The weeks passed. Months have gone by. And I grew older. The months have turned to years. And I grew up. I left home to go to high school in the town. After I graduated, I started working in a nearby town. I didn't go home very much. Eventually, I met a girl and we got married. And by that time, I'd forgotten all about Nana. Shortly after we got married, my wife found out that she was pregnant. She went to visit her parents for a while. I was alone in the house, so I sometimes visited my own parents for dinner. They still lived in the same house. One night, I decided to stay over and I slept in my old bedroom. In the middle of the night, I woke up and I used the toilet. While I was washing my hands, I happened to glance in the mirror. A sliding door in the middle of the corridor was open. It was the closet where I had played in as a child. I thought the door had been closed when I went to use the toilet. I turned around and was shocked to see that the door was closed after all. However, when I looked back at the mirror, the door was open. The chill went down my spine, and my hands began to shake. And I thought I saw the door sliding back slightly in the darkness. At that moment, I remembered Nana-chan. I was overcome by fear, but it was impossible to tear my eyes away from the mirror. The door was moving after all, in the mirror's reflection. A A white mist was floating across the darkness at the back of the closet. I stared. It formed into a familiar face. The smiling face of Nana-chan. I think I must have fainted. The next thing I remember was waking up on the floor. It was morning and my parents were still in bed. Wow. Oh, that must have been a dream, I told myself. Just a creepy dream. I really wasn't comfortable staying at my parents' house, so after breakfast I went to my home. My apartment had an underground parking lot, so I pulled up in my reserve space and parked the car. And just as I was about to get out, I glanced in the rearview mirror and did a double take. There, in the mirror, was the face of Nana. I looked back in surprise, but there was no one in the back seat. I looked back in the rearview mirror, and Nana-chan was still there. She was staring at me over my shoulder, and our eyes met. She looked exactly the same. The long, dark hair, the pale white skin. In all that time, nothing had changed. I was trembling, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. Eventually, Nana laughed. "Hello," she said with a smile. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Why didn't you come back that time?" she asked. "All this time I've been waiting for you." I was silent. I didn't know what to say. I could not find the words. "Hey," she said. "Come over here. Let's play from now on." In the reflection, her hand slowly stretched out towards me. "Hey, let's play here forever." "It's no good," I screamed. I didn't mean to say that out loud. "Nana-chan, I'm sorry. I can't go over there. I won't." Nana was silent, and her hand stopped in midair. Trembling, I grasped the door handle with all my strength and spoke in a small voice, like the little boy I had been so long ago. "Look, Nana, I have a wife now. We're having a baby soon, so I can't. I'm sorry." I ended up at a loss for words, with my head in my hands. I was shaking and shivering uncontrollably. And eventually, I looked up at the mirror. Nana-chan was still there. "I see," she said. "You became an adult, and you don't want to play with me anymore." Her voice sounded so sad and lonely. I can't," I said. Nana-chan laughed and smiled. It seemed like such an innocent smile. At that moment, I really thought Nana-chan would forgive me for breaking our promise. "Nana-chan," I began, but she cut me off. "If you don't want to play with me, I'll just have to find someone else," she said. "Someone just like you." And then all of a sudden, she was gone. Before I could fully understand what her last words were, she disappeared. Once and for all, Nana never appeared to me again. However, later that evening, my wife called me to tell me that she had suffered a miscarriage. Our baby was dead. And then I finally realized what Nana Chan meant when she said, "Someone just like you."